the modern world is sick. It's fucking deranged, right?
I mean, is there a fetish for like people who eat boiler?
Shit, yes,
Yeah.
there is. Mukbang.
Mukbang, there's a
Like
whole
a Māori
industry.
mukbang. That's what my contribution will be.
Kia ora koutou, welcome to Gone by Lunchtime. My name's Toby Manhire, Annabelle Lee-Mather, kia ora.
Kia ora.
Ben Thomas, kia ora.
Morena.
Running everything today, as ever, is Samuel, kia ora.
Kia ora, Annabelle, can you take your bracelets off, please?
It's like going through airport security. It's like gotta keep the pod clean.
The day today is August the 2nd, 2023. 2 months, exactly 2 months. It's always number of months or number of days. 2 months until advance voting starts.
More importantly, Leo season.
Leo season.
Oh, Leo season. Ben rising.
Yeah. Happy birthday to my mother
Today.
a couple of days ago.
Nice. Happy birthday to my mother on the 8th.
On the 8th, good. Ben, any birthdays you'd like to celebrate?
I'm a Leo. I've got.
Is it your birthday?
Yeah, I'm crawling closer to the grave.
How old will you be?
I don't like to say. That's subscriber content.
That's
We're going to celebrate Ben's birthday in a few weeks, live in human form at Word Christchurch on Sunday, the 27th of August. It's a very good festival, that Word Christchurch. So you should come along. You should come to our session.
Yeah, if you like books,
piano.
you will love podcasts.
And you can...
Since the internet came along and rotted our brain, listening to a podcast is basically like reading the first 3 volumes of In Search of Lost Time.
Quite often when people say, I listen to your podcast, they say, and I use it to help me get to sleep. So I'm imagining all these people coming along to our live events and just sort of gradually, like those kind of installation art things they sometimes do, just sort of gradually sort of falling into a deep slumber over the course of our event. Could be cool. Bring your own duvet. Word Christchurch.
Travel pillow.
Now, the 2023 campaign already has very many holes in it. I've listed some here. Potholes, sinkholes, wormholes, arseholes, obviously. But the most famous campaign hole, apart from existential holes, is the fiscal hole, isn't it? Yes, it is. We had transport policy announced on the weekend by National, which is like a throwback celebration, perhaps publicity tool for Stephen Joyce's new book, for Roads of National Significance. And then we had various debate back and forth, very election campaign classic stuff, including claims from David Parker and the rest of the Labour team that the money wasn't there to pay for them. And then, I think it was yesterday, Craig Rennie from the CTU came out with some calculations saying there was between 3 billion and 5 billion hole in National's promises so far. National haven't laid out their full costings yet, neither have Labour for that matter. But it is that National came back with, it's a partisan hack hit job. They didn't get involved in the numbers. Craig McCulloch had a good piece on RNZ this morning talking about the recent history of fiscal hole politics in Aotearoa. The 2011 Show Me the Money thing by John Key, which also included a lick of the GST from Labour. That was part of him saying there was a 17 billion hole. 2017, the famous Stephen Joyce identified an $11.7 billion hole.
That was when we first started calling them fiscal holes.
That was official, yeah.
A time, yeah. It was, if only we could go back and shoot an event in the head.
And then in 2020, Robertson identified a hole in Paul Goldsmith's numbers, and that was sort of something.
What was that for?
It was.
They just added it up wrong.
I think it was because they'd based it on the year before's numbers, which is quite often what happens, right? And there's because when the pre-FU comes out, which has the forecast and the lead up to the election.
Ben's favourite time of the.
Yeah, and it's this, but Ben, isn't this? I mean, 2016, Metiria Ture, then co-leader of the Green Party, came out calling for an independent costings unit. And that was sort of gently dismissed by the then national government, but not vehemently. Since then, there have been some moves towards doing it. National blocked it, and now National Nicola Willis is saying that Grant Robertson hasn't cracked on and done it. Shouldn't we just do this? I mean, it seems like something that we have these kind of weird scraps every time now, and it's hard for normies. I mean, not us. It's obviously easy for us to calculate the numbers. We just need a whiteboard, right, and an abacus. But wouldn't it be useful to have something like that?
It would be useful. To a certain extent, an independent costing agency just displaces the argument. A lot of political arguments are not about so much about how much something costs, although, with fiscal hold politics, we've gotten more and more into that. It's about, does it pay for itself? Does it increase economic activity?
Right.
A lot of, say low tax policy, they'll say, well, it increases economic activity. They call these dynamic effects. Now, when you do independent costings.
And lately we've got, is it inflationary?
That's right, which is another sort of dynamic effect or a knock-on effect. Those effects wouldn't be calculated by an independent agency. They would just go through and say, well, we think concrete costs this much. We think labour costs this much. We reckon it's in this sort of ballpark. Now, Treasury already do that sort of thing. Usually they're wildly off, particularly for infrastructure. But there is some value in having that. But what it would mean is that you displace the political argument away from what's the nominal cost into what would the effects be. Now, that might be a positive thing, actually. New Zealand is the sort of, relatively corruption-free country where we could rely on, what is by and large a pretty good public service to do that, particularly if it was an office attached to Parliament as opposed to, the executive government. There is a second issue about sort of fiscal hold politics in general, which is that to a large extent, this is, a hole is just an empty space. And to a large extent, these things are constructs of the imagination, right? At budget time, Grant Robertson said, there is no money left. There is no money left. I've spent it all. And if you go anywhere beyond the strictures of my budget, as I've presented it in May, you're being fiscally irresponsible. Now, since then, the somewhat heroic economic projections in the budget haven't come to pass, and Grant Robertson's government itself is $2 billion behind in terms of the revenue. So the government already has a $2 billion fiscal hole, but Grant Robertson isn't fronting up and saying, well, how am I going to pay for that? Right? He just adds it to the total and says, well, it's not like a household, And so the thing is this idea that, there is a certain amount of beans or stones or dollars, and you cannot go above that at all. Like, it's just not true. This is an arbitrary marker. Grant Robertson didn't say, if you exceed our budget, we won't hit surplus. We're already not in surplus. We're in deficit, right? So these are arbitrary milestones, right? Even if you accept that the calculations are off, it'll cost $3 billion more. That just means borrowing $3 billion more, right? It doesn't mean that the government is foreclosed on.
But it is a reasonable expectation, isn't it, in the lead up to election that certainly the major parties provide their costings and that they add up, right? I mean, accepting that there's all that rhetorical stuff and accepting they're always ways to raise money. They're the government. At
the same time, they don't have to add up to zero. They can add up to whatever the current deficit is. They can add up to whatever the projected deficit for next year is. They can add up to the projected deficit plus the $2 billion that the government's already in the hole based on falling revenue. So these are arbitrary markers, right? As long as you're telling people what you're doing, that's fair enough. But you can't just say there is a hole in this one ideal costing.
If I could just delve a little deeper
into the hole,
into Ben's analysis,
into his rhetorical.
The hole, my take on it is that if Matidia says we should have it, we should have it.
Maybe Matidia could be brought out of political retirement to lead the independent costings.
That would be my
Bureau.
great hope and wish.
From her, does she live in the castle? I don't know if she lives in the castle anymore.
I don't know.
She's
an
busy
artist,
running around after her mokopuna now.
She's actually back at Otago University. She's actually teaching at Otago University again.
Well, she teaches law.
And she's an artist, yeah.
She's pretty busy.
She's busy.
So, I mean, we'll get onto this later, but honestly, leaving politics is often the best thing that ever happens to anyone.
I disagree. I actually think she's the exception to the rule. I think a lot of politicians really struggle after Parliament, particularly Māori ones, and Matitia's just gone on to kill it. And
I also think
great,
there's something to be
things.
said for having politicians who just stick around, and having a diversity of view in politics and not having, the idea that everyone just has to move on. Obviously, the British Parliament is not necessarily a model for many things, but I quite like sometimes there's sort of a few old timers there who have particular views and who aren't going to be, aren't going to be easily whipped because they have a mandate from their own constituency.
Yeah, but then you look at what's happening to the US, and they have the most ancient politicians in their history.
Well, that's right. We'd start a select committee and it'd just start glitching.
That's true.
The median age is 97 or something.
And they're all buffering constantly. Speaking of the 2011 election and John Key demanding of Phil Goff that he show him the money, we've had a bit of a reprise of that in some sense in recent times when seems pretty likely that Labour is going to announce that its policy for the 2023 election is removing GST from fruit and vegetable or some version of that. It's a very popular policy. In the polling, it does extremely well. More than 3/4 of people say yes. Because when you're asked, do you think that GST should be removed from fruit and vegetables? Yeah. Fruit and vegetables are good. And GST, it seems like, but so it's probably focus grouping pretty well too. They're looking for a rabbit to pull out of the hat, looking for a interest-free loan 2005 type thing. They've instead landed on 2011, it seems. And you would think, Annabelle, that it might be like a kite flying exercise, where sometimes parties will feed out that they're looking at a particular thing in order to test the mood of the nation ahead of doing it. I would have thought it was this, except that you probably wouldn't decide to do it via Nicola Willis, finance spokesperson for National, which is kind of embarrassing that she appears to be their kind of early harbinger of policy. What do you make of that policy, the way it emerged? Is it a winner?
In terms of the way it emerged, yeah. I think for the average voter, they don't care. They're just happy that there's going to be GST-free fruit and veggies. But I think what it does show is, or it's an example of the challenges that Hipkins is going to face going into the election, which is that there's probably about, 20 MPs who probably have 20 MP-sized mortgages who know that they're not going to win their electorate seat and that they're not high enough on the list to get back into Parliament, who are going to have the jitters and they're going to start playing up. So I think while it may not be one of those people who leaked it to Willis, those are the sorts of discipline issues that he and his whips are going to be facing in the lead up to the election.
Yeah.
In terms of it being a winner, yeah, of course it is. As you said, it's polling really well. I think that other people would probably prefer the Māori Party's approach, which is GST off all kai.
Right. Yeah. Ben?
Of course, I'm a lobbyist, and so our profession loves this sort of thing. I've already been in contact with the makers of Up and Go in case the Māori Party policy gets instituted to sort of argue that it's a food, not a drink.
I think we should say for the record, Up and Go is not one of your clients.
No, Up and Go is not one of my clients, or Sanitarium or anything. Yeah.
My kids are going to be so
not
sad.
Not yet. He's been rocking it out with the Seventh-day Adventists.
Look, it is, for stern and colourful criticism of the removing GST from fresh fruit and vegetables policy, you need to look no further than the Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, right, who National had a great time sort of parading out the previous times he has contemptuously dismissed this policy.
Yeah. To which Grant Robertson's response on the questions of the boondoggle, as he called it, and the beetroot issue, which he'd also identified in terms of whether or not beetroot was something that was going to favour, lower income. I mean, broadly what you're saying is that it's not shown that such a policy would not necessarily benefit lower income people so much as higher income people. It's pretty hard to implement. It becomes the tax purists hate it. It's not good for small businesses. The other supermarkets might not pass it on.
Well, that's the major thing that I'm worried about is that there've been such sookie lalas in terms of reining in our supermarkets that they're just going to gobble up that 15%.
And it's a hard thing to measure because when you have we all know we should know what a block of butter costs, or these goods where you have a sense of how much they cost. Well, tomatoes go up and down all year, right? So does lettuce, and so it's much easier for that to get lost, that GST drop, than it would be on a product where it's
literally every winter. Even outside cost of living crises, our major news outlets run a story saying, why are pumpkins so expensive? And so the swing in terms of price for fresh fruit and vegetables during the year is so much higher than the 13% that you would save from GST, that worse than it not being particularly effective is the public wouldn't even notice and so wouldn't feel any kind of sense of gratitude towards you, which is the worst thing for a politician if they're going to be spending sort of $1 billion on a tax cut. We saw this during the cost of living, that cost of living payment of, 3 lots of $70 or something. It cost a lot of money and no one cared. That was the worst part about it politically.
Right. You want it to be a palpable policy,
that's why student loan. That's why we go back a million years now. 2005, Grant Robertson's brainchild of interest-free on student loans. They put a calculator on the website.
Grant Robertson's?
When he was an advisor,
he was working in
Clark's
office.
That was a stroke of genius. Say that one.
Yeah, because forget $20, $30 tax cut. You go to the Labor thing, you punch in how much this will save you, and it's like $30,000.
Yeah,
it's like winning lotto, right? Now, GST on fresh fruit and vegetables just not really the same thing.
Well, obviously it applies to a wider group of people than the
and sometimes I think it's it's the principle of it, right? Like if we want to make sure that kids have kai in their puku, even if rich kids do benefit from it too, then
and it speaks to people's experience. Speaks to people's experience across the board who are going into supermarkets and going, "Holy shit, is it really that much?" And often, as you say, Ben, the answer is, "Well, it's out of season. You shouldn't be able to necessarily get a capsicum when you like." But on the beetroot and boondoggle question, the other thing about Grant Robertson's responses in the House, and the responses generally are that though they have not confirmed that this is true. They would not be responding in the manner they are, including Grant Robertson talking about how his father used to put beetroot on scones in response to a question in the House. Were it nonsense, right? Like it seems...
It certainly seems like it is the presumptive tax policy. But then again, look, the fog of war, it could change. If they decide that, if they do some overnight focus group, if they do some focus grouping this week and it turns out that people have been a bit swayed by some negative coverage, it might be something totally different.
Well, that's the thing, They're like, you never know. Is it their policy? Is it not? How long will it be their policy? Could be a day, could be a week.
Into the bonfire.
Not anymore. We've created 10 policies, and by election day we'll have 2.
Well, that's right. Chris Hipkins said when he was...
Simply log on and vote,
In a similar sense, they were asked about, let's get Wellington moving, this sort of $7 billion boondoggle of its own, which has been around, as long as this government has. And I don't know what's been done apart from a crossing near the airport, but it has all these grand visions of and he was asked about light rail in Auckland as well, $15 billion sort of cost. And he said, well, no, look, we're definitely doing it. We just don't know where it's going to go, whether it's going to go, above ground or underground or into the policy bonfire or...
The next stop is...
it's all very fluid. But Annabelle's right. I think the most interesting thing about it is that there were two leaks last week. One from Caucus about an emotional backbencher who was... getting their feelings out about Kiri Tapu Allen. And that was leaked to Andrea Vance. And then secondly, this policy, which could be leaked, could be you never know. It could be it could have been a missent email or something like that. These things do actually happen.
Well, Nicola Willis previously had been very confident
on the
in the lead up
Treasury
to the
website.
budget. From the lead up to the budget, that there was discussion of new tax, and then on the wealth tax proposal, she had word of that. So whatever part of the pipe that has come from, probably the same one.
That's right. Yeah. That's good. That's a very good point. Yeah.
Oh, well, that's the first time you've said to her, we're doing this podcast for like 6 years.
No, I think that's a great point.
Incredible. Annabelle, you touched on the Labour list there, and there's that particular. Well, I think so.
Yeah, I did.
I think you did because of this, because that question of the leaks, and we've seen it before in both parties, that when people start to get the strong feeling that they're going to miss out.
Yeah.
Because of they're less popular as a party, not to put too fine a point on it, then you become perhaps a little bit less disciplined in terms of you become a little bit maybe more pissed off with particular people, and it sort of slacks the tightness a bit around that. What in the Labour list did you see that surprised you? People have been talking about Michael Wood, but he's going to come back in Roskilde on a majority. Twyford probably too. He's got 10,000 majority in Te Atatū. Anything else in there, Annabelle? I saw actually that Soraya Peke-Mason is not on the list.
Yeah.
She's going Te Taihaora only, which is quite a big ask against Debbie Ngaurupaka.
Yeah, I'm wondering if that's her strategy, if she's like going to run the whole, vote for me and get, 2 MPs for the price of one, because the, Māori Party will probably get enough to pull Debbie through. But I don't know if it's a strategy thing or...
Nanaia Mahuta is also...
Well, that's the thing that I find weird. Yes, we know that Nanaia is going to win her seat and she'll win it forever and ever until she chooses not to run in it anymore. But just from an optics point of view, there's only one wahine Māori in the top 20. And that's Willow Jean.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you have said to Nanaia, we'd like you to be on the list so that it doesn't look like we've just burnt out all of our wahine Māori?
I think so. The interesting thing, I think, is, I don't think there's anything particularly surprising in it. A lot was made of sort of Wood and Twyford being low down, but a lot of other MPs who are in relatively, still relatively winnable seats are further down the order. And part of this is the thing that you're talking about, right, which is that Hipkins, in a very real way with this list, and Labour are managing decline. They are going to lose about 20 MPs, give or take, right? It could be more, could be a little less. What you have to do is try and keep everyone's spirits up, keep everyone motivated, and stop that kind of panic and sense that you've sort of lost everything. You're on the way out. There's no reason why not to leak on caucus and that kind of thing, right? So part of this is emotional management as well. So in that because the top 20 is very list heavy. There's up to, if you count about 3 people who I think will probably lose their seats, Joe Luxon, Ginny Anderson.
Is Ginny Anderson going to be all right?
I suspect Bishop will beat her with the swing, and the third one.
Where is she on?
She's 17th, so
she'll be in. Yeah. But what I mean is, once you put in, once you see that those people will probably lose, maybe Priyanka Radhakrishnan as well might lose Mongakiekia. That could be up to 11 of the top 20 are coming in on the list.
Yeah.
Right, which is that's a lot. There's a lot of list MPs in the top 20.
So it's 30-somethings. It's the 30-somethings.
So these 30-somethings, even though they look like they've got pretty good positions, and that's to go, so they'll look at that and they'll think, well, I'm number 33. Nothing, that's a good position. They're still very, very borderline and probably not going to get in.
So, for example, Ibrahim Omer, who is standing in Wellington Central, is on the list at 37, and that's not a lock. I mean, that's it could go either way.
On the other hand, you would want to put him to the proof. You would want to say, look, if you're going to lose a Labour seat, you don't get in on the list, right? You're coming in,
which is part of all those calculations, isn't it?
Can I just say, in terms of going back to Soraya, bit of a lost opportunity there. I have met her, and I think she's a really impressive wahine, but you'd also think that with the loss of Mecca and with the loss of Kiritapu, that they would be looking to bring some new wahine Māori MPs through the ranks. So, to not talk her into going on the list.
What about...
In terms of Māori MPs, though, some exciting, fresh new talent in East Coast. Tamati Coffee, a former TV weatherman, has thrown his hat in the ring.
Tamati Coffee.
After a long retirement from politics.
Current MP, list MP, lost out on Wairiki last time.
Yeah.
The only Labour MP to lose a seat. During a red tide where they won farming seats in the South Island.
Although, to be fair, he dethroned Te Ururoa Flavel, no mean feat,
True. With a lot of help from Meka Whaitiri, who was actually doing a lot of the hard yards to sort of diminish Te Ururoa's reputation fairly or unfairly.
I mean, it is.
Was that with that terrible Māori land?
With the Te Turu Whenua stuff, yeah.
That was self-inflicted, to be fair. It was not great policy.
So, look, let's just do a stock take on Labour, right? Since Chris Hipkins became Prime Minister, he's, as you mentioned, thrown a whole lot of policies onto the bonfire. He's lost 4 ministers, 2 for conflict of interest related areas in the general mix. 1 blindsided by a minister who's just quit to another party, former Meka Whaitiri. Most recently, the Justice Minister arrested and facing charges and is now will not stand for Parliament at the next election. You've got your Revenue Minister resigning over quite quietly slipped past the keeper during the Kiri Allen reshuffle, dissatisfied by the rejection of plans that he and Grant Robertson put forward to introduce a new wealth asset tax. You've got no real big vision proposed yet. We've maybe got this 2011 redux of GST exemption on fruit and veg, but it hasn't been announced yet. Mostly it's going back to basics, doing less. We've got it's not like there's Luxon mania rippling through the streets of Aotearoa, but the National Party leader is getting better. He's more match fit. He's sort of been working around the country. Maybe you can argue that point. But then after
good weeks and bad weeks.
After the Hipkins bump at the start of the year, the polls have been moving slowly downwards. Roy Morgan, usual caveats, 26% this week. We've got a poll coming out tonight, News Hub read, which, who knows? I mean, maybe it'll be fine. But is there any way back from this? Like, do these things have a momentum of their own in the absence of any kind of game changer, which these things happen. What do the Americans call it? The October surprise or whatever. In the absence of anything,
you mean in the absence of any great policy, are they going to be able to come back?
Well, any as yet unimagined. Like, I don't know if they knew what the policy was, they'd be proffering it. But
would they, or would they be? Would they be holding on for a bit longer? I don't know.
I don't know either. But I guess my question is, there is a sort of sense that is there a way back from here?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
I mean, look, put the Roy Morgan aside. Roy Morgan tends to very much overstate the support of minor parties. They've got the Māori Party at 6%, down from 7%. New Zealand First at 5%. It's also much more volatile than the other polls. I would believe that Labour's down. That seems consistent. But remember, throughout all of this, it still remains very, very, very tight between both Labour and National and Labour, Greens, Māori Party and ACT National. It's even when we say, National have been able to form a government on a few of the last couple of polls that we've seen, National and ACT, but it's only been by, a few seats. So we're back in the space of traditional MMP elections, which are very tight. And if 1% can swing it, 1% going either way makes a 2% change. So, that's entirely possible. Labor have a lot of faith in Hipkins to win the campaign, to be a better debater, to show up Luxon.
Yep.
Luxon is still showing really worrying signs of not being across the detail of his policies. I don't know if you heard him on ZB with Mike Hosking, he was terrible. He couldn't give the headline figures for, the biggest policy that they have announced so far, transport one.
Right.
And he's got to be better than that during the campaign. He is going to be buffeted from all sides on every issue, every day, and the campaigns, the debates will range extremely widely. And he can't afford to be showing up and look like he doesn't have that sort of same command of details. Key, maybe it's an unfair comparison to keep making, but Key thrived on numbers. He saw the world through numbers. Numbers were sort of the anchor for his understanding of policy. So he always had these concrete details to throw out. And Luxon is relying a little too much on the fuzziness in the lines. He's gotten much better at delivering the lines. I think you're right, he's much improved there. But he does have to be able to actually back it up and sort of seem as if he's explaining, with the numbers and with the detail.
Do you think that's like a hangover from being like a corporate dude where you just like refer to your CFO to rattle that shit off and he doesn't have one? Because that's not how politics works.
Yeah, look, I think to a certain extent that might be. The other thing is that when you're explaining your results as the chief executive of Air New Zealand, you actually have a lot more data. Oppositions often do lack data, and you see this over the argument about the costings. Are they using the most up-to-date figures? And they say, well, these are the most up-to-date that we've been able to get from the government. And then David Parker adopts a Sphinx-like sort of, appearance and sort of says, well, maybe there's secret figures you don't know about, And so it is tough for opposition that way. But yeah, look, in terms of the things like the cost of things that, cost of projects that they say are going over budget or are pointless or that they're reprioritising money, they've got to have those headline figures. They're still in the driver's seat, certainly, but there's no guarantees.
I think Ben's right in that I think Hipkins will run circles around Luxon once we get into the campaign proper. The challenge that Luxon has is just trying to keep his party, his MPs, his ministers as tidy as possible. Yes, there is a bit of a lack of talent behind him, but I think, when we see the other groups coming more and more into the fore during the campaign, that'll kind of be, if we're thinking in terms of a right bloc and a left bloc, the Greens have some really strong performers. Te Pāti Māori has strong performers. And, there's still some surprises that may come out during the campaign. We don't know.
Speaking of Luxon's challenges, I'm surprised that he has not yet been definitive on New Zealand First. New Zealand First in the poll, and again, Roy Morgan. 5% in Roy Morgan. Over 3%. Over 3% in a bunch of other polls. They have previously gone from this sort of level in polling. Now, I know that
I'm just saying there is no way that if Luxon needed New Zealand First to govern, that he would say, no, we're not going to go with New Zealand First on principle. Of course he will.
Well, if so, I mean, it's just...
And there's no way that if New Zealand First got a better offer from Labour, they wouldn't go with Labour. But Winston has ruled out Labour on the campaign trail.
But didn't he unrule them out?
He went on News Talk ZB last night and ruled them out. Heather Duplessis Allen did a quite amusing... She's like, I mean, there always seems to be is there a little bit of wriggle room? He said the current lot, would he work? And I want Winston to say he will not be in a coalition or provide confidence and supply. And then Winston Peters rang in. Winston Peters on the radio, he goes, yeah, I would. He basically read out, it was like a kind of, a kidnapped ransom statement. But he basically did it. He ruled it out. And look,
I'm currently in the boot of my car reading from a document while Brian Henry drives me to the studio.
Obviously, all of this comes with vats full of salt. It's
I don't believe that for a second.
But he ruled them out. He's ruled them out.
He's ruled people out before and gone with them. So, it's meaningless.
He's now saying, basically it comes down to national or crossbenchers, and all that sort of thing. But given all that, I come back to this. John Key in many ways the model for Christopher Luxon's approach, his kind of, as far as he would like to emulate that, was clear. He said, ruling him out. And then he said, not ruling him out, I would much prefer not to work with him, but if that's what New Zealanders decide, then we'll deal with that. And at least there was some clarity. And Luxon was asked again by Guy Nespiner on RNZ this morning, and he
That's
equivocates.
the perfect response,
he comes back to
in
this.
my view.
He comes back to this. Oh, it's a hypothetical question. It's like, well, you ruled out Te Pāti Māori. That's a hypothetical question. Hypothetical question. It's not hypothetical. Is not a get out of question free card.
I mean, saying what you'll do if you get into government is entirely hypothetical.
It's all hypothetical. A manifesto is hypothetical. It's predicated on you winning. Otherwise, it doesn't mean anything.
By and large, in this campaign, we are imagining future events.
I don't know why they. I just think it's going to. It's because Christopher Luxon's one of his most powerful lines, and it's the circumstances are feeding it beautifully. Is they're a coalition of chaos. I'm strong and stable.
That's right.
It's a line that has served national parties extremely well over the past. Can we have? Maybe that's why he doesn't want to do it. I just sort of think the question is going to keep coming and coming and coming. He's hoping that New Zealand First will just disappear to 1.8%, then no one will care.
We're all hoping this.
Do you think he would rather go with New Zealand First than ACT? Because I reckon he would probably be in a more powerful position in an alliance with New Zealand First.
I mean, that's what Labour governments have done,
because won't Seymour be coming for Minister of Finance role?
Audrey Young did a very good
she did a fancy
speculative
cabinet
piece, which I'm not sure what her sources.
Which had Nicola Willis as finance, and that's the way it's. But
look, there's no chance David Seymour will get finance. There's
the deputy prime minister role is the one for
sure, and you will see much more of an ACT. If they come to terms, which Seymour is pretty. He seems pretty staunch in his negotiating positions so far, hypothetically. You will see a lot more, ACT MPs in cabinet and, and probably in pretty reasonably significant roles, I think. In terms of ruling out New Zealand First, and I've got to make sure that, these aren't my personal views colouring my analysis.
God forbid.
I still tend to think there is more upside to ruling out Peters than downside, in the sense that Peters is competing in the same pool of votes as National and ACT, and of some of the mental parties, the outdoor recreation
and a bit of grumpy Labour.
Well, I don't think so. He's really pivoting. He's just said he wants an inquiry into COVID and. He's going things.
He's appealing to the disaffected, aka quote big air quote freedom movement.
He's saying we will ensure a full independent inquiry into the COVID-19 pandemic response, covering multiple lockdowns, social and economic impacts, and decision making. Is this just an ad for his memoirs? He was the deputy prime minister. It's like it actually is. I feel like I'm having an aneurysm when I read this stuff. This charlatan, this absolute fraud. I mean, look, I will give Christopher Luxon $10 if he rules out Winston Peters.
Wow, okay.
Was that bribery?
Is that allowed?
Is that a New
legal?
Zealand First?
No, I think it's okay.
I think it's fine. Is that reverse treating?
I would strongly encourage Christopher Luxon.
Okay.
The thing is, it's only going to take votes away from the centre right, particularly if he says, I'm not going to support Labour.
Yeah.
So all you're doing is cannibalising your own vote by giving daylight for Peters to
and it
be
might be that more of that vote cleaves to ACT, where the vote if he said no New Zealand First, some portion of an already small number would peel off. You would think, not guaranteed, but you would think. And probably more of that will go to ACT, I should think, than National.
Doesn't matter.
But that's still building your potential government, right?
That's better than it going to New Zealand First and having to deal with them in government.
Well, exactly. I mean, it ends in tears anyway, doesn't it? I mean, the risk, I guess, Annabelle, is that if you come out and say, we won't go with New Zealand First, then Winston goes, you see, all of these bastards, pox on all their houses. I'm the only person who can stay. He uses that to leverage,
I don't actually think that's a risk.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So will you give $10 to Christopher Luxon if he just announces it either way? Or do you need him to announce? I'm going to give Christopher Luxon $10 if he just announces either way. I don't mind. Just want clarity. What's your $10?
My $10 is the same as Ben's $10.
Okay.
Why don't we go $5 each?
It's 20. No,
Or we could up the
$20.
stakes and make it 20.
We'll write 2 individual letters.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, good. Well, look, we've got much more money to give out on this podcast in the lead up to the election. Can we expense that? I don't know. I don't know how this works. We're probably going to go to prison now. I think that we've probably
We could probably get like a GST thing on it.
All right, okay. Bribes to politicians, I'm pretty sure, are GST exempt. Thank you very much. That was Gone by Lunchtime. We'll be back soon. Kia ora.